Hello, my name is Hezekiah Tucker. My discovery project is titled Reimagining Representation, African Americans in the Orchestra World. This topic is personal to me as a black musician, and in this video I'll explore the history behind the lack of representation in orchestras and imagine a future where musicians who look like me are no longer the exception but part of the norm. I still remember my 5th and 6th grade orchestra classes. The room was full of African American students who loved playing their instruments. But as the years went on, the numbers shrank. By 12th grade, my chamber class had only 3 or 4 African American students. The rest were white and Asian students. This raises an important question. Why does the orchestra feel so closed off to black classical musicians, and why does it remain such a predominantly white field? Above me, there's a chart from the League of American Orchestras 2023 report on racial, ethnic, and gender diversity in the orchestra field that shows African Americans make up only 2.4% of orchestral musicians. Mark McNamara's The Last Water Fountain, The Struggle Against Systemic Racism in Classical Music Helps explains why. He quotes Lee Pringle, who describes the classical world as a nearly impenetrable network of mostly white donors, directors, and administrators. These same people who ultimately decide who is represented, welcomed, imagined, and excluded on stage. Through the lens of radical imagination, this becomes even clearer. On page 81 of Imagination, a Manifesto, Ruha Benjamin writes, "All paradises, all utopias are designed by those who are not there, by the people who are not allowed in. Orchestra is a kind of paradise for many, but historically it was built without black musicians in mind." Just as the orchestra was historically built without black musicians in mind, it's important to remember that black classical musicians have always been here. Their contributions were simply minimized or erased. As the Jim Crow Museum notes, black accomplishments are downplayed or erased. African Americans are underrepresented in scholarship, orchestras, and audiences. A powerful example above me is Joseph Boulogne, a brilliant 18th century violinist and composer. He was also an elite athlete and one of Europe's greatest fencers, and earned him the title Chevalier des Saint Georges. Beyond music, he fought in the abolitionist movement and even led the Légion Georges, an all-black regiment during the French Revolution. Yet, despite all of this, he remains largely unknown because history pushed him to the margins. I didn't learn about him in any of my orchestra classes. I found out through the 2022 film Chevalier. It makes me wonder why I grew up knowing Bach, Mozart, and Beethoven, but only discovered black composers like William Grant Still, Florence Price, and Joseph Boulogne through my own research. Ruha Benjamin captures this dynamic perfectly in Imagination, a Manifesto, describing a deadly hypocrisy, how blackness is selectively celebrated within the white imagination. And it's true, many white people celebrate black excellence in jazz, hip-hop, R&B, and rap, yet when it comes to black classical musicians, we are ignored, sidelined, and rendered invisible. Continuing on the idea of black musicians not being acknowledged and ignored, in the article The Last Water Fountain, The Struggle Against Systemic Racism in Classical Music, author Mark McNamara highlights this through the experience of Robert L. Davis, who felt pressured to alter his resume to avoid being seen as too black. Davis explains, "My middle name is Lamar. I've taken that off my resume. I've also made other adjustments related to color. I played a concert for the National Association of Negro Musicians and took that off as well." He did this to help improve his chances of getting auditions. This reality is common for many African Americans who fear that openly signaling their black identity could cost them opportunities, even their dream careers. This is why radical imagination is essential to my topic. We need to dismantle the systemic biases in classical music, which requires a collective re-envisioning of what the field can be. As Alex Kajnabev notes, radical imagination is a collective activity produced through dialect encounters, our capacity to conceive of the world as it might be otherwise. In other words, reimagining orchestras isn't a fantasy. It demands directors, teachers, students, and entire communities working together to reshape classical music. In conclusion, I envision a world where black musicians aren't exceptions, where Joseph Boulogne, William Still, and Florence Price are taught right alongside Mozart, where young musicians of color walk into rehearsal rooms feeling a sense of belonging, where auditions are redesigned for fairness, leaders work to diversify the field, and communities finally hear their own stories reflected in the music. Benjamin warns us that utopias are built by who gets left out. Kajnabev reminds us that imagination is a collective force, something that we create together. My project brings both ideas together and reimagines orchestras not as barriers, but as spaces of true belonging.